Good evening. Today's talk on the Verge of the Great War is an examination of our Civil War at a level much, much higher than we're used to studying it. Usually we tend to focus inward on the rebellion. There are endless quantities of heroic episodes and famous figures and politicians, times, dates, and places to memorize. It's a very well documented war, and the only inkling we have that the outside world took much of any interest is usually when we mention the British supporting the Confederacy. This, of course, was their most fervent wish, as chimerical as it might have been, and one of Lincoln's big fears. But in reality, the problem that Lincoln faces is much, much greater than just England alone. In fact, the war could have involved all of these countries and span the globe, given the trade routes and the other colonies that some of these places have. It would really have become a world war very, very easily. They want very much, the crowned heads of Europe, to destroy our Republican experiment. We tend to forget nowadays that this country is an experiment, an ongoing one. Lincoln was well aware of that, and he wanted not only to keep the Republic intact, but to prove he could do so, that it could be done. Now, there are three major players here. Obviously, England is a major player, but also the French and the Russians also take major roles in the war, mostly for their own benefit, though, as we'll see. Let's look at each one of these in succession. For Queen Victoria, what they hope to gain is not really a access to American cotton. And there's a couple reasons for that. There's a bumper crop in 1860 that the Southerners ship out, and the warehouses in England are full. When that starts to peter out, well, they find other sources, China, India, and Egypt, and that cotton's just as good as American cotton. Also, the wool and flax industries, which had been subservient or secondary to the cotton industry, are resurging now because there's a market. People need clothes. Plus, a lot of their investors are making a lot of money, blockade running. So there's no real impetus to see that change at all. The real goal, though, is the ruination of a commercial rival, meaning Northern shipping, Yankee shipping. Our clipper ships are much faster than theirs. They can be built on the cheap, and we can turn them out far faster than the English can turn them out. By the start of the war, we are almost on a par with the amount of tonnage shipped in our hulls. The rest of the world, we're number two, period. Everyone else in the world doesn't add up to much more than the English have. So the Queen sees a great threat in American merchants. To destroy that merchant fleet, to destroy our merchant marine, is Queen Victoria's prime goal. And by creating privateers in England and allowing them to be crewed, most of it English crews, is one way to do it without risking English lives. The North does not fall for this. They understand exactly what's going on, and they routinely refer to these raiders as the Anglo-rebel pirate fleet. They know exactly what the British are doing. This is in violation of England's own neutrality laws, but by recognizing and in effect allying with the Confederacy on the high seas, they are an active partner in the war, tacitly if not explicitly. Now, our Navy had seen this coming in the 1850s, realized that our merchant marine was proving a threat to England, and recommended that we build up our own Navy to counter this. The trouble was our transition from sailing to steamships was too slow. We couldn't keep up with English ship manufacturing at that time. Their fleet is 700 ships. Little less than half are steamships at this point in time, or steamers. Our Navy at the start of the war is 42 ships. 16 are still men of war under sail, and only 26 of them are steamers, and a lot of these are laid up for repairs at the start of the war. So we're a little bit intimidated by the British, and they love to thumb their nose at the US Navy anytime they encounter them. In 1862, curiously, if you read the newspapers, it's not that Northerners suspect war with England might come. The tenor is they know war is coming. For those of you who've seen some of my other presentations, there's a top secret, ultra secret rocket torpedo being developed because Gideon Welles, the Secretary of the Navy, foresees a naval war with England in the very near future. The inventors of the submarine Alligator, a fellow named Brutus de Villeroy, his supporters are saying, look, I know it's not finished yet, but we should build 12. And they want 12, not so much if the British blockade our ports, but when the British blockade our ports. No one in North America is doubting the fact we will be at war with England very, very soon. The nature of blockade running in the war takes a big leap about 1863. That showed or not there. In 1863, instead of just sending in finished supplies, in January of that year, there's a ship called the Princess Royal. that we know is coming. The Yankee Navy knows is coming, and we end up capturing it. The Princess Royal is critical because she had not only on board finished weaponry, she had on board the means to make finished weaponry. There were plates or sheets of weapons grade metals on there. There were the lathes and machinists to train Southerners how to use them. The night she was captured, there's a famous episode that, you know, Navy historians play up. The two Confederate ironclads made one of their rare forays out of the harbor on a foggy night and surprised and trounced the Yankee blockading fleet. But they didn't get close to what I suspect their real prize was, which was under guard by the Housatonic, which was the Princess Royal. They wanted very much to get her back, and in failing to do so, it may have turned the tide of the war. Had that ship arrived with her cargo, the Southerners would not have needed blockade supplies quite as much as they did. Again, the real goal was the Princess Royal. And in addition to sending this type of technology over, the English are also supplying technical data on aerial rocketry, which, as we know from the C-minor presentation, is shifting over from blind firing to targeted weapon systems. Now, the French are actually more of a threat, believe it or not, than the English were. The English, of course, have been a bugaboo since the Revolution, so we focus on them. But Napoleon is already on the continent in quite a bit of force. Just before the war begins, several nations had gone into Mexico, forced their way in, Spain, England, and France, to land troops and force the collection on a Mexican debt that was owed them. Of course, this is, as usual, not an occupation. The French say it's an error of the civilization. The rebellion begins, and of course, the U.S. is distracted, and France no longer tries to work under the subterfuge of civilization. They're an occupier. They're out to conquer Mexico, period. He claims he wants to civilize it for its own good, but in reality, this is a stepping stone for him to get to Central America. His goal in all this is to cut a canal and open up the markets of the Orient to France. He also thumbs his nose at the Monroe Doctrine. We think this was like a special shield, you know, aegis that protected us as soon as people saw, oh, we can't intervene in the Americas. The U.S. has no right to keep out European nations as far as Napoleon is concerned. He sets up a puppet government under Maximilian in Mexico. He has contingents or treaties with the Italians, the Austrians, the Belgians, which involve them in that same landmass. And Queen Isabella in Spain takes advantage of this acknowledgement that you can't keep us out to reoccupy Santo Domingo and suppress a rebellion in Cuba at the same time. Now, France doesn't so much want to conquer the Americans. She actually wants a fairly strong north there, mostly to keep the attention of the English, act as a shield almost, or buffer. But they don't want us to be too strong. They just want to border the southern states, because if they do, they can sort of control the cotton supply. Just as a refresher, this is the way cotton works in 1860. The South, of course, has loads of cotton, and it has a lack of manufactured goods. There are, in fact, more factories in New York City alone at this time than the entire South. They only have 2 modern foundries. There's just none of that down there. So they need manufactured goods from the North or other countries. Other countries, such as the North, has manufactured goods, no cotton. And that's the same with the English and the French. So this is sort of a symbiotic relationship. They send raw cotton, finished goods, and they get industrialized, you know, items back in their own country. Now, if France were to take over or so influence the distribution of Southern cotton, this is what happens. France has cotton now and manufactured goods. There's nothing that other countries have except gold. France could easily pauper both Northern America and the English by demanding gold if they want cotton at all, which their industries need. So this is actually a rather terrifying scenario for the French to take over. Napoleon also went and said something that we think nobody was even thinking at the time, in that I don't really care about slavery in the South. It's not a serious argument against recognizing them. And he pointed out that there are other countries that they not only support and trade with, but protect, such as Egypt and Turkey. And they have slavery. And he made the old promise of, well, we'll use our influence to eventually emancipate slaves, but right now there's no reason to refuse recognition based on that alone. Russia is the third major player in all this, and her motives for a while are hard to discern, but they're really quite self-serving. In October of 1863, Russian fleets arrive off New York City and San Francisco. And of course, the reaction we all typically have is, oh, they're there as allies to Lincoln. Russia had a soft spot for the North, or for America, simply because we were the only country that, while we didn't ally with them in the Crimean War in the mid-1850s, we did supply them a lot of black powder going up through Russian Alaska and over through Siberia. And Lincoln is actually having weapons made in Russia. You can actually find pistols that have in Cyrillic on there, the maker's mark. But they're not really here to ally so much with Lincoln. As a matter of fact, the admirals are told, don't attack anybody unless the rebels fire on civilians. They will defend civilians, but they're not to go after military targets at all. What Alexander has done is save Russia the situation of being without a fleet at all. The ships he has sent over, about a dozen in each case, are the latest modern steamers he's built since the 1850s. During the Crimean War in 53 and 54, the massive Russian Black Sea fleet was trapped in the harbor of Sebastopol in the Black Sea and was destroyed and scuttled. And he doesn't want to see that happen again. So despite there being picket ships, the French and British Navy picket ships outside all those harbors, somehow they managed to sneak out a score of modern warships and sail them around the planet to these two major ports. What he's taking advantage of is the fact that even though the U.S. is at war, Russia's a neutral. So it's safe for him to be there. And of course, legally, he can point out to the British that, oh, well, there are a lot of Confederate raiders in your harbors around the world, so you can't say anything about this. What he's done is place his fleet out of his ice-locked harbors and out of reach of the French and British. And the reason he's making this threat to them of naval intervention is that they're threatening him. Poland at this time is a Russian province struggling for freedom. And in January of 63, there's the January uprising, which will eventually be put down. But the French and British, of course, are threatening to blockade Russia, land troops, enforce Polish independence. But they really can't do that because Alexander points out that 75% of your merchantmen are sailing ships. And I have 2 squadrons of 20-some ships that are steamers. It will be child's play to interdict all your trade routes to all your colonies and other countries around the world. There's no way that he could fail to ravage those merchant fleets. England and France abandoned Poland. They let the Russians go in and repress them, and rather brutally. And as soon as that's done, guess who goes home? Russia is not an ally of the North. He's been using Lincoln and our war just for his own personal gain. Europe, of course, is heavily involved in our war. This is interesting. We don't typically follow other wars as much as the Europeans were following us, and their perceptions are quite telling. In part, this is due to the telegraph, but also newspapers surged in numbers like crazy in the 1850s and 1860s. So between this rapid transatlantic communication and the distribution and print of stories, Europeans are getting our news about as fast as we are, actually. And they are very much interested in how this war is going. Most of them are living under repressive governments. There are censorships, censors who black out the papers that you can print and everything. Certain things can't be said in France. Not everyone in England has voting rights. And of course, Russia is very repressive. A lot of the crown heads don't want to see a Republican experiment actually work. This fellow is a philosophy professor at the university in Paris, I believe. And he basically, I don't think he was arrested, but I'm sure he got censured by the censors for speaking out to the public about this, pointing out that we're all in the boat together. The world's a solidarity, and the cause of America is the cause of liberty. And he realized that if that light of liberty is snuffed out across the Atlantic, it will also die a borning in Europe. So they want very much to see Lincoln succeed. Another actually said, this is an epic battle between the forces of liberty, equality, and self-government against aristocracy, slavery, and repression, many of which the Europeans lived under. Lincoln, of course, this is what he's talking about when he says it is an experiment. We're testing now whether any nation so conceived as a republic can long endure. So Davis, though, aligns with and plays to aristocracies and the elite, and Lincoln plays to the working public, who actually become the North's biggest ally. It's another reason why France and England can't really intervene directly in the war, because while their militaries and aristocracies and politicians want to come in on the side of Davis, the rank and file aren't quite so keen to attack someone who's trying to make a republic work and end slavery. Now, Davis's appeal to the aristocratic or racial superiority will come as a surprise to a lot of people. These are quotes from a Richmond newspaper, and some of the terms you'll be familiar with, but not in this place and time. And I will point out that while we often say, oh, Southerners sought for their home and their rights, their version of rights for the rank and file trooper in the ranks probably didn't sync up with Davis's. Davis claimed that the master race of this continent is to be found in the southern states. This is not a term that the Nazis worked up. It had been used rarely actually before the Civil War. But in making this plain, Davis was saying exactly what he felt, that Southerners were superior. Obviously, they're much more superior men than what he called the mongrel, many-tongued enemy. That's us in New England, folks. I may make a t-shirt like that. Also, he recognized that there have been an awful lot of Southern presidents. And of course, they were the richest section of the country since the founding of the Republic. And this was because they have a stronger will, their larger wisdom. This is the sort of thing that distinguishes superior races of men. They also consider themselves to be the descendants of English cavaliers instead of Anglo-Saxon rank and file dogs like the Northerners. Now, Davis actually has an unusual and unexpected ally. This surprised me. Pope Pius IX issued an encyclical in December of '64 called the Syllabus of Errors, or Condemning Certain Errors. The Pope is the arch enemy of republicanism and liberalism of all kind. He does not want to see the world change. He wants everyone in their place doing the job they were assigned by God and their politicians with no changes. He actually instructs Catholics to renounce freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of religion, saying these are heresies. Same with religious tolerance and separation of church and state. Basically, everything that our American Republic was founded upon, he's death against that. Davis asks him for a letter, which he writes, and he arms his, not so much recruiters, but he distributes it throughout the North and takes it to Ireland. He's trying to discourage Irish immigration to the North. He doesn't want Irish Catholics coming over and putting on a blue suit and fighting against the wannabe Southern state. So by 1864, the world is on the brink of a world war. This is a lot like the weeks, days before World War I erupts. It's not so much hard and fast alliances, but a long, intricate connection. The English are using the war, of course, to their own advantage to ruin Lincoln. They're sort of kind of an ally with Davis. On the high seas, they most definitely are, just not openly. The French, of course, are also using the war as cover to go in and take over Mexico as a stepping stone to Central America and that canal they want. They're not really doing much to directly help Davis. They're mostly using Davis in the war. In Mexico, Benito Juarez, of course, is at present powerless, but he's trying to found a republic, which Lincoln wants very much to support. But of course, he has a war in his hands, and he's fighting ardently against the French. Queen Isabella taking advantage of everything to stomp out any sort of uprising or Republican feeling in the Caribbean. We have a sort of kind of on and off again relation with the Russians. They're not doing anything to hurt us, but again, they're using our war for cover. They're not really here to help us at all. The only people who are openly for us are the working classes in France and England. And of course, the Pope is now trying to turn all Catholics against Lincoln. Oddly enough, Otto von Bismarck is waiting in the wings, licking his lips like a hungry cat, waiting to see which way this is going to go, who we should ally with, and who's going to be left standing when the dust settles. So why didn't this situation explode? Why didn't we have World War I in 1864 or 65 or even 66? Well, reality starts to set in over time. The French had recently conquered Algeria and found out that it wasn't so easy to conquer and hold it. It took, whoops, go in the right direction, we'll do this. Algeria, at 460,000 square miles, took 100,000 soldiers to keep everyone down. Mexico is even bigger. At the same ratio, it would take 165,000 more soldiers to hold Mexico down. There's a lot of resistance to this war, which is just blatant conquest with no gain to be found except Frenchmen dying over there. The French public doesn't want the war. They begin protesting against it. For Russia, of course, they've suppressed the uprising in Poland. The Tsar played that one very well, but he realizes that in rebuilding his fleet and his armies and putting up new defenses to replace everything lost in the Crimean War. He has paupered himself. He can't pay for half of what he's had built. Towards the end of August in 65, he actually orders a reduction in force and troop strength to an ordinary peacetime footing. The Tsar is not up for fighting any war right now. For England, reality begins to set in. They realize, while not toothless, they're not quite as powerful as they once thought they were, or would like the world to believe. So why are they still helping the Confederacy? This was the most interesting thing for me in doing this research. The cotton supply, of course, we know that they had built up in 1860, eventually goes away. But now they have other sources, England, China, and India, in what they consider barbaric nations. Barbaric nations insist on payment in gold. The problem now is that if suddenly the southern cotton supply is liberated and back on the market, what if the Americans decide, oh, we want paid in gold too? This could drain the British exchequer, just as if the French controlled the entire cotton trade and insisted on gold payment. England needs the war to end slowly and go on until prices settle down again. They really don't care who wins. They just want the fighting to continue until they can get, balance their checkbook, basically. Ending abruptly is the one thing the Brits don't want. This is why they're willing to send the means to make weapons in early 1863 to Charleston Harbor. This is why they're willing to give the Southerners rocket technology. They want to keep the South in the fight as long as possible to buy themselves time. Our belief in English superiority begins to fade at the same time. For instance, of their army, we realize, looking back historically, while they paid for and provided a good general in Wellington to defeat Napoleon, it was the Prussians, Russians, and Austrians who did most of the fighting. And again, this is hard to get your head around because we're an English-speaking country, so of course we get the English history more readily than we do histories of that period from all these other countries. We did remember that in 1815, we thoroughly trounced England's best troops at New Orleans. Probably could do it again. Also, the Crimean War was mostly directed and fought by the French, not the British. Again, we suffer from getting English histories, the Charge of the Light Brigade and all that. I know I couldn't tell you any one specific battle that the French fought and won like that, but we know all the English ones. It's fought mostly by the French. Also, what army they have is stretched awfully thin, either putting down rebellions, fighting wars, holding down the colonies they have. The Royal Navy alone requires so many men that the army goes wanting for soldiers. They really can't afford a large army. Also, the Canadians have griped for years about, we need more defense from England. I remember that's called British North America. And finally, the British are like, we're not getting anything from you. It's not worth it. We're not going to defend you anymore. You're on your own. Good luck, Canada. That was actually in the newspapers. They also realized that the Navy is not as powerful as it once was after the battle in Hampton Roads. Their Navy was reduced to 4 ships as soon as the ironclads duked it out. They only have 4 ironclad steamships. And what's more, in some ridiculous mistake, these ships are not armored at the bow and the stern. They're armored to receive a broadside. They're not armored in a way that modern ships would need at the time. The lyrics to this song came out about 1862. The U.S. Navy was fed up with dealing with the English and being snubbed by them. And the song basically says, you just give us that Navy of iron and we're going to go sink everything British. By the middle of the war, we now have 323 steamers, including 74 ironclad steamers. Many of these are riverine, but the fleet will continue to grow. For the Confederacy, they see the writing on the wall and realize that the English really can't do anything to help us. That even if she could receive us, she would not, because they know what the Americans in the North are going to do. We just have to fight it out with the Yankees. In the North, we realize we can take on England with a very good chance of winning. By the end of the war, we have a fleet that's grown from 42 ships to 671, and 5/6 of them easily are steamships. The British fleet has grown also, but they don't have any more steamers than we do. Now, the Navy, by some people's arguments, including me, can be said to have decided the war, if not won it, in April 1862, or April and July of 62. At these 3 battles, they saved 2 major armies at the first and the last, and captured the most significant city in the South in the middle of all that. This is not just my perception. There's a great quote from a Mississippi senator in 1915 when the Senate was discussing how and should they blockade English or German ports with the beginning of the war. And this fellow here, John Williams, basically said, it wasn't your army that beat us in that war. It was your Navy that whipped us. So the Navy is aware of this and aware of their abilities and very keen to visit this kind of sentiment on the English, shall we say. We overmatched the Royal Navy in so many ways in 1865. The ships that matter, of course, will be ocean-going ironclads. The Brits have only those 4, which are poorly armored. We have 21. We can jump on them 5 ships to 1 in any battle. Also, they haven't been paying attention or designing their ships to stand up to modern combat. The armor on those ships is only 5 inches thick maximum. Our armor goes up to 11 inches. Our guns can cut through those like a hot knife through butter. 10 inches is not a challenge for the guns on our ironclads. Their guns, however, can't begin to pierce that much armor. An observer down in Charleston watching the attack of our ironclads in 1863, being bombarded furiously, realized that there wasn't much damage being inflicted and said you might as well pelt them with peas. There's nothing he knew in the English arsenal that could stand up to our warships. So one naval officer had a great quote here. It says, the Royal Navy possesses nothing that would not be sunk in less than 15 minutes by any one of our ironclads. And this was quite probably true. The second verse here, of course, lets the British know exactly what's going to happen to them. We'll turn on the jealous old tyrant and punish John Bull at his door. We want to take the war to England. And at the end of the war, we realize we have about 600 ships that will need employment. Why not keep the men in the Navy and send the ships out and sink every British merchantman and warship you can find? Just sweep the planet clean of them. The song sounds funny nowadays. It's serious in 1865. The best chance of the war erupting worldwide, or at least against England, is right after the war ends over here. One newspaper actually said it might be healthy for the Americans to reunite, fighting a foreign foe and everything. So maybe we should go to war. The trouble is that English and French ranks would, of course, be filled mostly by the very working classes that had supported us during the war. And so we don't want to punish them. It was like turning against an ally to do so. So how do we punish the aristocracies without punishing the workers? Well, what we decided to do was make them pay. Any cotton they want, they have to pay in gold. All the compensation claims, pay us in gold. Any money that was transferred there by Southerners before the war, you send it back in gold. And also food. We had supplied 55% of the British diet, despite the fact of the war, for the previous 5 years. And now, if you want more food, you have to pay for it. And perhaps most telling of all, remembering how the British, ostensibly being neutrals, had supplied warships for the South, merchant raiders, we said we might just do that for the Irish and the Mexicans as well. Let them build ships here and operate at our neutral ports and go raiding French and British merchantmen and warships. And this gets England's attention, obviously. We made sure the world knew what we had done, that the Republic had been made to work, and we wanted to make sure that the privileged classes in the rest of the world recognized this and were very much aware of it. And they were, as were the rank and file. Within the next couple of years after our war, there's a reaction to it. There are massive public demonstrations that lead to voting rights in 1867 for the English. There's fierce guerrilla resistance in the Caribbean to Queen Isabel. She does put down the rebellion in Cuba, but Santo Domingo, they withdraw from right after the war. Napoleon suddenly realizes that there's going to be about 1 million men in the United Federal Army, and he gets out of Mexico as fast as he can, announces the end of their civilizing mission in 66. The Mexicans take care of Maximilian the following year and put him against the wall and execute him and have a republic. Russia sells Alaska to the US. They're off the continent now. And England actually organizes Canada into a self-governing federation. They are now also off the continent. Lincoln has succeeded by eliminating Davis, by forcing Queen Isabella out of the Caribbean. Of course, Mexico is now free of French influence and Napoleon's influence is diminished. England has fled the continent, as has Russia. And the founding of the Mexican Republic, a Catholic nation, but with Republican values, diminishes the power of the Pope. Lincoln has proven the Republic can be made to work, and he's held it together and made this statement to the rest of the world. This is how close we came to World War I in 1865. We can open this up to questions now. I will point out that as yet there's no book for the specific talk, but if you're interested in my other books, you're welcome to jot down this URL. I'll point out too, as a public service announcement, the bottom 4 books, upon the best authority, are transcriptions of newspapers from the Civil War. Every single day, about 1,000 words apiece. You can order the paper copies, but they are prohibitively expensive because they're so thick. If you go to the website, there's a link there to go read them for free on a sister website. I would recommend that. You don't have to order these things. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we can answer any questions you have now.